We are wrapping up the discussion of the Nisuch Hamayim. So this parak has really been one where we deal with the collection of the mitzvos that apply on Sukkot, where we had lulav, which we obviously knew, but then we elaborated on ones that are mikdash related. We had a rava, obviously an element of a rava outside of the mikdash, and then we had Nisuch Hamayim, which has been a very dominant mikdash ritual, which is going to continue in the next parak with the Simchas Beis HaShoeva that was done the preceding night. And here we are, though, wrapping up the aspects of the Nisuch Hamayim, and it says that they would do the same thing they would do on the weekday, they would do on Shabbat, except on the weekday they would draw the water from the wellspring on Erev Shabbat, and they would fill it up and put it in a barrel, and then they take it from that barrel on Shabbat. Okay, so yes. I'm sorry? Was it night? The Nisuch Hamayim was in the day with the Tamid Shel Shachar, together with the wine libations of the Tamid Shel Shachar, but the Simchas Beis HaShoeva started the night before, and it was like partying through the night. This is what we're going to read in the next parak, and then it led through the morning, was accompanied the drawing of the water, and then taking the water into the Beis HaMikdash and doing the pouring of the water. So it was a previous night celebration that led into the next day's Nisuch Hamayim. No, this wasn't done at night. It was just a celebration in anticipation of it and so on. The avoda was done in the day. The avoda was done with the Tamid Shel Shachar, the pouring of the water with the Tamid Shel Shachar. Right. Okay, so now the last Mishnah says the following. Let's take a look. Okay, K'maseh b'chol. So they would do the same thing on the weekdays that they would do on Shabbat, or they would do on the same thing on Shabbat they would do on the weekday, except, as I said, they filled up this barrel, and a gold barrel, the Mishnah says, but it says, Eina Mikudeshes, a non-sanctified gold barrel. The water would sit in it until they could draw it from it the next morning, but was when it was already in the Mikdash. So, V'yamai, why says the Gemara, Nesi b'Mikudeshet? Why not just have a sanctified gold barrel? Why does it specifically have to be a not sanctified one that it would be sitting in? So, Amar Zeiri Kasavar, because this Tana is of the opinion, Ein Shi'ur L'mayim, there's actually no exact amount of water. Yes, we do 3 log, but it doesn't have to be precisely 3 log. V'kli sharis mikachin shalom midas, and sanctified vessels sanctify even without intent. What does this mean, and what are these two factors? So it means the following. The normal principle is that things that, as opposed to like livestock, which have to be slaughtered to be sanctified, to reach their highest level of sanctity, kedushat haguf, something like, let's say, inanimate, like a mincha, is sanctified when it's put into a vessel, when it's put into a kli sharet, one of the temple holy vessels. Is anything, and what is one of the significances of that kedushat haguf, as opposed to just sanctifying the flour verbally, is that once it gets that, it's at the full level of a korban, which means that if it stays overnight, it's lina. Right, then it's like lotalin, letting your korban stay overnight, and then it becomes invalid. If it's taken out of the Beis HaMikdash, it's invalid. So that is relevant once it gets kedushat haguf, where for inanimate things basically means once it's put in a kli sharet. So the Gemara's point is, if the barrel was sanctified and you filled up with water, it would become sanctified as kedushat haguf, intrinsic sanctity, of its essence, and therefore it would become invalid by the next morning when you actually needed to use it. Okay, so just say that. Why do you have to say Shalom Midas? Why do you have to say that there's no minimum amount? Well, Shalom Midas is clear why it has to say, because maybe you could say, look, maybe the Kli Sharet should only sanctify when I wanted to sanctify the thing that's in it. If I intentionally say I'm drawing this water from the spring here, but it should not be sanctified because I'm going to need it tomorrow morning, so maybe it isn't. Maybe if I designate it that way, it won't have that effect. Nope. The very fact of it being in the Kli Sharet imparts that sanctity, even if that was not your intent, even if your intent was the opposite of that. That's Shalom Midas. So you'll be stuck. The water will be sanctified, will become invalid Friday, over Friday night. Well, then what's the point of saying Ein Lo Shir? Because you could say another point. Okay, fine. We're not going to go with your intent. We're going to go with the objective reality. But if the objective reality is that the water needed for the libation is 3 log, and in this here Kli Sharet, you can tell it's a Kli Sharet because it's so fancy and everything. In this here Kli Sharet, you have 5 log of water. So then the objective reality is that it's not the water that is, ready to be used in the ritual. Meaning, yes, you could get the water out of it. It's not that it's, it's too much. It's not that it's not enough. But nevertheless, the whole idea of a kli sharet and the whole idea of the kedushat haguf is it basically says, like, this is about to be offered up. This is in the state that it's not just been sanctified verbally, it's really in that state of about to be offered up. So if there's too much water in here, and you say, okay, fine, your intent doesn't matter, it'll work shalom das, but it shouldn't be sanctified because the objective reality shows that it's not ready yet, that this isn't exactly what you need. This is 5 log, it's not 3 log. So that's why the Gemara says, no, also, ein lo shi'ur. Although we do 3 log, technically it could be any amount, and therefore the objective reality is once the water is in here, it automatically becomes sanctified, no matter how much there is, no matter if you don't want it to be sanctified, and therefore we can't do it the day before because it'll become invalid by the next morning. Okay, so now let's see how the Gemara continues. Okay, and therefore if you bring it in a sanctified barrel, and you'll have it stay over the whole night, if saluhu belina, become invalid by lina. Okay, now by the way, Tosfos asks a very good question. There's a big Tosfos here. Part of the Tosfos deals with this issue of the basic Tosfos deals with the following question: why do you have to say it's possibilina? As soon as I go out to draw the water from the wellspring, I'm outside the Beis Hamikdash. So if that was a sanctified vessel and it all happened automatically, then it's immediately possible biyotze, because it's outside of the temple environs. So Tosfos says, all right, there's an obvious answer to that, which something cannot become sanctified out of the Beis Hamikdash, right? Once you can't say, you're already sanctified and you're yotze at the same time. Let me first be in the Beis Hamikdash and be sanctified, and then I'll be invalid once you take me out. So, okay, one of the things you would need for this to work is not just to be in the Kli Sharet, but it be in the Beis Hamikdash. But once you bring it in, then you're stuck. Then it'll become invalid overnight. Okay, that's Gemara's answer. Chizkiah says, Klei shares ein mekachin elamidas. No, actually, you're wrong. Actually, you can manipulate the situation so it won't be sanctified. The vessels will not sanctify unless you want them to. Okay, so if you specifically stipulate, or maybe in a stam case, but if you specifically stipulate, this should not be sanctified when I fill it up in this barrel, it won't be sanctified. So you're fine. You could use it the next morning. So then why not use a sanctified barrel? Why does it be a non-sanctified? Obviously, the understanding is, since this is a temple ritual, and it would be more appropriate to use a sanctified barrel. So why not use one? Just stipulate it shouldn't sanctify the water, until the next morning. So the Gemara says no. It's rabbinic. It's a concern. People won't know what's in your mind. People will think that you had intent to sanctify it. And then they'll say, look, they sanctified it. They used a sanctified barrel, and they're going to then use the water the next morning. So you see that even once something is sanctified, you can let it stay over till the next morning. And that'll lead to a lot of mistaken acts and mistaken understandings. Okay, so that's his answer. Amar Reb Zera, now Reb Zera, Amar Reb Yanai, Amar Reb Zera, Reb Zera in the name of Reb Yanai in the name of Reb Zera, so it goes even further. Afilu tema yesh yor lamayim, vikli shar sein mekachem midas. Even if you say there's nothing to be worried about. Number one, it won't sanctify without your intent. Number two, there's an exact amount of the water, 3 logs. So the objective reality, somebody looks at it and will say, forget the fact that they don't know what's in your head. You'll say, look, they should objectively know that it can't sanctify. We'll see there's way too much water. Nobody will think, it obviously already was sanctified. There's 10 gallons of water here. Nobody's going to think it's ready yet. So therefore, what's the concern? Even there's a concern. Why? What's the concern? People won't know why it was filled. People will say it was filled for the Kohen to wash his hands with the next morning, or the Kohen Gadol, because the normal Kohen would wash it by the sink there that would have a well going down, a bucket going down into a well. But the Kohen Gadol, they would have this more special thing. They would sometimes draw water for him to wash his hands. So there is no minimum for water. So you might think there's nothing to be concerned about, right? You need intent. B, it's a huge amount of water, and nobody will think that it was the right amount for the Nisuch chamayim. You still don't want to do it because people won't always have all the facts, and people will think it was for the kohen gadol, and therefore they will think, look at that, the water was drawn, it was sanctified, and now they used it the next morning. So there's a range of different concerns about under what circumstances will the water be sanctified if it is more, and if you don't have the intent for it to be so, you have the intent for it not to be so, and whether or not it's the clear agreement is that if it's more than is what is needed, it won't work because the objective reality is not ready. But is there really, although we have a certain amount, we do the Nisa Chamayim, is there in actuality a precise amount or not? Okay, and now we get to the last line, which is if this water you drew the day before spilled or was uncovered, then then obviously you can't use it, and you have to draw the water from the well that's basically in the Beit Hamikdash, even though it's not flowing water. Nishpacha o nitkalta. So the Gemara is going to focus on the idea of uncovered. What is the problem? As you might be aware, in the Mishnayot, there is, not here but elsewhere, there's a prevalent concern of uncovered liquids that cannot be drunk. The Gemara explains that it's based on concerns that snakes drank from it. Let's take a look at the end. There's poison in it. Let's take a look at what the Gemara says about this. The Amai says the Gemara, why is it? Why not just take this water that was uncovered and we can solve the problem? Have it pass it through a sieve, and the sieve will take out the poison. So, Lema must listen to Reb Nechemia. Maybe our mission is not like Reb Nechemia because there's a debate whether you can use a sieve to solve the problems of uncovered liquids. Ditanya, we turn to Brisa, misnenet. You have a sieve that's over water. The water is still considered to be uncovered, and it doesn't solve the problem. Amar Reb Nechemia said, Reb Nechemia, Amosai, when is that true? If the bottom thing where the liquid is contained is uncovered, so even though there's a sieve above, some snake could still have had access to it from below. If the bottom vessel, apparently there'd be a top vessel which would contain the liquid, and then it would sort of like when you make like filtered coffee, there'd be something top which would hold it, and then it would slowly go down a sieve. So he says into a bottom vessel. So he says if the bottom is covered and the snake only had access to the top, it's no problem because as it goes down the sieve, the poison will get filtered out. A filter. Yeah. Well, I don't think they had a filter with micro holes at the time of the Gemara.
It's like a cloth.
What? You're right. Okay, so you're right. A sieve suggests larger holes, right? Okay, so a filter is better. Okay, so it's a filter. Okay, so even though the top one is uncovered, there's no problem. Why? The poison of a snake, it's like a sponge. And it'll float at the top. So I don't exactly get the sponge analogy, other than that a sponge floats on water. But anyway, it'll be filtered out by this filter. So anyway, so according to Reb Nechemia, what's the problem? Just pass this water through a filter. So the Gemara says no. Afilu tema Reb Nechemia. Even according to Reb Nechemia, it would be a problem. You couldn't use this water. Eimedam Reb Nechemia. When does Reb Nechemia say that you can use the water lehedyot for a commoner? Aval legavoa for God. Mi amar. Would he ever say such a thing? The Reb Nechemia. Do you think Reb Nechemia doesn't hold of the pasuk? Is this the type of thing you want to offer up to your, to your officer? Hayirtzecha, like to a person in high position. Hayirtzecha, will it find favor Will it find favor for you? Or hayisa panecha, will it cause your lifting up of your countenance? Amar Hashem Tzakot says, God, is this the type of thing you want to bring to God? So even if technically it's edible, we don't bring things on the altar that are not able to be eaten, but it's not the type of thing that is acceptable on the altar. Certainly not a thing that we're doing for this whole major ritual. We're not going to take something that was that was in such a lowly state. So therefore, we don't want to offer it. Now, before we end, I want to make an interesting point, which is 2 prakim ago, or whatever, the third parak introduced lulav and esrog. And, that opened also, you might remember, with a positioning lulav as a type of a korban. right? You might remember the discussion of why is a stolen lulav invalid is because it's it's a mitzvah b'avia, very very nice. But how does the Gemara learn it out from? It learns it out from a pasuk that says ve'hevesim gazu v'esapiseach v'esacholeh. Is this the type of thing you want to bring to God? Something stolen, something lame, something something sick, okay? And particularly sort of positioned to this comment. Here you actually are dealing with something that's a korban, that's the water that is brought, right? But basically you have lulav and esrog, and then you have the aravos, which had a whole mizbeach ritual as well, right? And now you have the water, and it's being bookended by two psukim that in the opening of the third parak and the end of the fourth that are talking about, how do we present these types of things to God? What is appropriate to be offering to God? Not only are they on the same theme, guess what? They're both from Malachi Perek Aleph. And if you take a look at what? That was your Haftarah. So did you recognize that they were both from that? So look at that. So to me, that was a big chiddush. So okay. I said, oh, wait a minute. Those sound like the exact same point, doesn't it? Like, Hayirtzecha, Yisa Panecha, and the other one was Vevesem Piseach, Vesacholeh. Well, actually, it is the same point because they're both coming from the exact, not just happen to be in the same parak, but they're actually both coming. I mean, that's exactly what that parak is saying. I mean, God is sort of complaining about the people and and how they have despised God's service, right? So it says so here's the pasuk. God says, "V'im adonim ani ayei morai amar Shem tzvakot lachem hakohanim bozei shemi v'amartem b'meh bazinu et shemecha magishim al mizbechi lechem megoal v'amartem b'megi al nucha." V'amarchem shulchan Hashem nivzehu v'chi tikishun iver la'izbawach ein ra v'chi tagishu piseach v'choleh ein ra hakriveu na lefechatecha hayirtzecha yisa fanecha amar Shem tzvakot. So you bring all of this stuff. Piseach, choleh, you say, no big deal. Really? Is that the type of thing you want to be bringing to God? And then it says, and then obviously the next post, not the next, but then it's talking about that how mimizrach shemesh v'ad mvo'o gadol shemi bagoyim v'chol makom muktar mugash lishmi minchat torah ki gadol shemi bagoyim amar Shem tzvakot. Everybody is going to be bringing, my name is so great, and look at how you treat me. And then it says, v'amartem name metla'av whatever, v'aveitem gazu v'tapiseach v'tacholeh v'aveitem et mincha ha'ertzeu. So, etc. So it's really a little bit in a whole parsha of Klola. So it doesn't evoke necessarily positive associations when you realize the full context. But if this is ultimately, if Sukkot is us drawing close to God and continuing this theme of Yom Kippur, right, and the Lulav and the Arava, and all of this is this sort of this whole offering up even outside of the Mikdash, in a way, these rituals are. I think it's very powerful, the way it sort of pulls together all of the, everything we've been learning in the third and the fourth parak and talking about what is this sort of ideal way to be offering up to God and offering up our best to God, which is the theme of Sukkot, right? You have all of your success and all of the best, and then you appreciate that and you give thanks and you rejoice before God. Yes. Dov, you wanted to say something?
This idea of mind belief maybe has more to do with being contaminated in the sense of being, unsavory rather than dangerous. Or that's more of the aspect of being examined here. Because
what do you mean?
Well, would you really drink water that filtered, that you thought filtered out the snake poison?
Right.
I'm not so sure. Right?
Because you're afraid there's still a little bit of poison in it.
Yeah.
Right. So but the question you're saying is what makes this inappropriate? Is what makes it inappropriate the possibility that it's still a little poison? What makes it inappropriate is that it had to go through a process of being filtered, and that makes right. I think it's the latter. Right.
The poison is not an issue.
Exactly. Right? So you're right. I agree with that. I think that that's exactly the point. Like if you took water that was basically wastewater, I think some of our drinking water might be this, but if we were more aware of it, water that really had all this disgusting stuff in it, and somebody promised, don't worry, we go through the whole process, 100% pure right now. You could believe them about that, but it's like, I'm not going to drink that stuff. So anyway, Charlie will tell us that actually is what we probably drink.
Well, it's not wastewater, but it's unfiltered.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering about the whole idea of mind and belief in general.
How much that is part of it? No, because that the Gemara really treats us like a strict isser, not just as something like people wouldn't want to. But that's a separate portion itself. Okay, so Hadron al Chulav Arava. So that is the end of that parak. And as I said, nice way of pulling together the third and the fourth parak, and again reinforcing a theme that we've seen continuously reinforced: the whole idea of mikdash in the context of Sukkah, even those aspects that are not in the mikdash. Mikdash. Okay, and now we turn talking to Mikdash, the fifth parak, which is about the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. And as I said, this is the party that began the night before and ran through the entire night to lead up to the drawing of the water that would take place in the morning. Okay, so Chalil Chamisha V'Shisha, the playing of the Chalil, which is the recorder, is that what we call it? Flute, is 5 days and 6 days, meaning sometimes it'll be 5 days, sometimes 6. But the musical instruments is really what that represents, that were played for the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. This is the Chalil that was played in the Beit HaShoeva. You would not play the music of the Simchat Beit HaShoeva on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. So therefore, what would that mean? You would draw water 7 days, the 7 days of Sukkot. The Simchat Beit HaShoeva would begin the night before. So the night of the first night of Yom Tov, you would have maybe a Simchat Beit HaShoeva, but you would not play the musical instruments. Okay, so that's 1 day less. We're down to 6. If Shabbos was the first night of Yom Tov, the other 6 days you would do it. But if Shabbos was during the week, you would not do the whole thing the night before on Friday night either. Not only that, as we just learned, there wasn't even a ritual of drawing the water outside of the Mikdash and bringing it in on Shabbos because of the carrying issue. So it would not take place on Shabbos and it would not take place on Yom Tov. So it could be either 5 or 6 days you would have the music for this of the Simchat Beit HaShoeva. Let's take a look at the Gemara, top of Nun Amud Bet. Itmar was taught, Rav Yudav Rav Eina Chad Tani Shoeva. One's girsa is Shoeva, the drawing water of the water, which makes a lot of sense. That's what you would be doing. As I said, it would be a procession that would lead out. The Chad Tani Chashuva, which is interesting. Shoeva Chashuva shows about an oral culture. If it was written, you could never get that mistake, right? But one's version was Chashuva. The Simchas Beis HaChashuva, which is funny because what's Chashuva? Is the Simchas probably Simcha Chashuva. So it would probably not be Beis, it would be Simchat Bayit HaChashuva, right? As opposed to Simchat Beit HaShoeva, this would probably be Simchat Bayit HaChashuva. So V'chatani Chashuva. So Amar Marzutra, Mandatani Shoeva lo mishtabesh, Mandatani Chashuva lo mishtabesh. Either one is not necessarily, this isn't corrupt and that isn't corrupt. They're both good versions. Mandatani Shoeva lo mishtabesh. The one that says Shoeva is not a corrupt version. T'chsiv u'shaftem mayim b'sason. Yeah, the whole idea of joy in the drawing of the water, that obviously that pasuk is going to be a major theme throughout this discussion. That is means that's why we do it, and that's the joy about this whole thing, and that's about the shoeva, the drawing. This is a very important mitzvah. It comes from the 6 days of creation. So 2 interesting things to say. First of all, in terms of the drawing, Tosfos quotes a image or a metaphor, a symbolism rather, that is I think very prevalent in thinking of Simchas Beis HaShoeva, and he quotes it from the Yerushalmi. So if you take a look at the Tosfos, I'm really a mess today. Joe, let me use this. Sometimes you're just having one of those mornings. All right. I have to just hope it doesn't seep in. Save my computer. Save my Gemara. Did I save my computer? Is the question. So, thank you.
Computer isn't Kodesh.
Yeah, good point. So it won't sanctify the coffee that just spilled on it. All right. Thank you. Is it Makadi Shalom Idav? So Tosfos says, Chatani Shoevav Yerushalmi Mefaresh. Shemisham Shoavim Ruach HaKodesh. From there, you draw the divine, spirit. Shashchina Shoreh Mitoch Simcha, because the Shechina resides amongst joy. That when Yonah went, I think I got it all. Thank you. Okay, so it says that the symbolism of this is that the drawing on the divine presence and that sense of the overflow, the of the shefa, and so on. Now that's very interesting also because seeing it symbolically, of course, it is very important. The whole idea of water, in an agricultural society, obviously this is key to their success and to their well-being. But it's sometimes I guess a little bit harder for us to relate. In Israel, it's not so hard to relate, but it's a little harder for us to relate about the whole sort of water in the literal sense as that being the big thing, and also what's the connection of simcha. Simcha is about the joy maybe of the previous year, but what's exactly the simcha of praying for water for the following year, or symbolic things to show, to beseech God for the water? Why is that exactly simcha? Simcha might be about the success of the previous year. So thinking about the water symbolically is very powerful, because as we've been talking about, the whole theme, starting from Rosh Hashanah, but particularly Yom Kippur, entering the Kodesh Kodashim, the Sukkah, Ananei Kavod, all of this, as we just mentioned, the Mikdash theme, and all of this sense about bringing in, God's presence into our lives for the following year, like the drawing of the water, and the sense of the closeness to God leads to joy, and joy also brings about the closeness to God. So seeing this all very symbolically about God's presence, is very powerful, and very powerful in terms of tying into the theme of Simcha. So that is in terms of just the Shoeva and the symbolism. Now, in terms of this Sheshet Yimei Breshit, what does that mean that this is a thing that's been around since Sheshet Yimei Breshit? So if you take a look at Rashi says, Damrina Le'el, because we said just yesterday, that the caverns were created underground for the purpose of the water. Now that's for the purpose of the libations. Now that's a little bit funny because first of all, as you remember, there was a debate whether there were underground caverns, even if there were, whether they were man-made or naturally made, God-made. Number one. Number two is also that mostly it was for the wine. Right, those caverns, the libations that went into them were wine libations. It was only 1 week; it was the water libations. So I don't know. Every day I have a simcha space or shoeva because of the caverns and the wine. So it's a little funny exactly connecting it to that. What I would suggest, not necessarily different, that it contradicts Rashi in addition to Rashi, but whatever. What I would suggest is the other idea that if you have, it says how many days would you have it? Number one, let's just point that out. You would do the libation 7 days, but how many days would you have the simcha space for shoeva? 6, 5 or 6. But let's say 6 would be the max. Well, you have 6 in Sheshes Mei Breshit, first of all. And if you think about water, right, way at the beginning of the Masechet, one of the earliest learning derivations of the idea of Succah was that Succah represents Ananei Kavod, but then it learned from the pasuk of Ve'ed Ya'aleh Min Haaretz V'Hishka et Kol, at what's the pasuk? Ve'ed Ya'aleh Min Haaretz V'Hishka et Kol, what? That's Kopnei Hadama. So about the cloud, which is Ananei Kavod, but not learning from the Ananei Kavod of the Midbar, learning from the original cloud that rose up in the story of creation and gave water to the world. So if you think about it, I would suggest that what this is evoking is the whole creation motif. And water, obviously, water starts right at the beginning of creation, right? Because by Tov Avohu, Aretz V'Mayim, and all of that, and the water motif here. And of course, this is also Briat HaOlam, is this period of the year and the beginning of a new cycle. And that's sort of like a joy in terms of, obviously it brings us back to the water. There's a bakasha element for the water, but there's also a joy in the nature and in the world and in the natural world and in all of this that God has given us. So I would suggest that is that it's chashuvah misheshes yimei breshit, pulling up that other theme of what's going on here with the whole focus on water. Okay, so let's see now as the Gemara continues. Tanu Rabbanan, hachalil dochet hashabbat. The chalil, the flute, overrides Shabbat. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda. That's the words of Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda. The sages say, Af Yom Tov Eina Dochet. Not only does it not override Shabbos, it doesn't override Yom Tov, which it seems to be our Mishnah. Amir Rabbi Yosef, Machlokas B'Shir Shel Korban. Rabbi Yosef says, 1 minute. Let's be clear here. Nobody thinks that the party, the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, the musical instruments for that will override Shabbat. The issue that musical instruments might override Shabbat is the song that they sang to accompany the bringing of sacrifices. So basically, here's the rule: that with with every with all of these first of all, in general, because we talked about the nesachim before, with all sacrifices that were not sin related, not chatas and not asham, you would bring nesachim. Okay, you would bring wine libations. By the sacrifices that were communal obligatory sacrifices, which basically would be the morning sacrifices and the morning and the afternoon, the tamid and the musafim on the days that you would have a musaf. So with communal obligatory sacrifices, at the time of the pouring of the nisachim, you would have the shir that the Leviim would sing. That would only be done during the pouring of the wine, because this is actually interesting because it has implications in other areas of halacha. Ein shira el al hayayin. So the idea that song is over wine, which is basically the basis of why we have rituals that are done over wine, like saying Kiddush over wine and Avdallah over wine. That idea, by the way, of wine is giving significance to it and as ritualizing it, is very important, because most of the rituals we do over wine, the regular ones, are in the Gemara, Kiddush and Avdallah. But most of the other ones that we do, or all the other ones that we do, are not in the Gemara, but were adopted soon afterwards at the Gaonic period because of how they give sort of weight and ritual significance. So the fact that you use wine at a bris milah, the fact that you use wine at a wedding, all of this is not in the Gemara. Or the 2 cups of wine, Ersin and Isuin, all of that is post Gemara. Gemara has it as Kiddush, Havdalah, and Birchat Hamazon, depending on if you think you need it for Birchat Hamazon. Okay. Anyway, that's Shira Layayin. So when they did the wine libations during the communal obligatory sacrifices, there would be the song of Levim, Hashir Shel Levim Hayu Amrim, right, which we say every morning, which would be done at the Tamid Shel Shachar and Tamid Shel Ben Barim. That, although we only say it at Shachar, so it was done at both of them. Okay, so that's the shir. Now, with that shir, you would have some of the Levi'im singing, and you would have some of them playing musical instruments. So here, would they play the musical instruments on Shabbat? That's the question. So who is saying? Who is it that is saying this? I'm sorry. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda is saying, no, not Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosef is saying is that this discussion of do you play the musical instruments on Shabbat is not a discussion about the party that you'd have on Sukkot. That would not be musical instruments on Shabbat or Yom Tov. The issue is the real song and music that would accompany korbanot. That is that's like the real korban related, directly korban related, and there the question is, would that override be done even on Shabbat? So let's just read this. Ikar shir b'pli. So how does that map on? Amar Rav Yosef, machlokas b'shir shel korban. The share that accompany the korban. Rav Yossi is of the opinion, Ikar shira b'kli. The fundamental shira is with a musical instrument, meaning when the Torah says, when there's an idea that a korban has to be accompanied with song, does it mean with song or does it mean with music? So that's the debate. Rabbi Yossi says the primary thing is the music, the avoda, and therefore it's an avoda in the mikdash, although it's not a full avoda because the Levim are doing it, but okay. V'dochet Shabbat, but that would justify it overriding Shabbat. So can you play the musical instruments when you do the shira that you normally do with korbanot at the time of the korbanot? Can you do it on Shabbat if the music is central? Yes. Rabbanan Savri Ikar Shir B'Vad. The music is just an accompaniment. That's not central. What's central is the song, what's said in the mouth, the oral song. The avodahi, and the music is not really central to the avoda, and therefore me'ena dochet Shabbat cannot be done with Shabbat on Shabbat. But the whole music and singing that was done around the simple space of shoeva from the night before, not talking about at the thing that accompanied the bringing of a korban, at the moment of the bringing of a korban, that it's just joy. It's not an avodah. It's a joy that accompanies, or that's done, whatever, to build up to an avodah, but it's not part of the avodah. Okay, simchahi ve'ena dochet Shabbat cannot override Shabbat. So our Mishnah that says it was not done on Shabbat, not done on Yom Tov, is what everybody would agree. The only one that would suggest that it's done on Shabbat and Yom Tov would be the thought that is done at the time of the korban. I want to say 2 things about that. One is, first of all, it's suggestive to associate the idea of the shir by the korbanot with the idea in the Torah that has something like that, which is the chatzotzrot, the trumpets, right? Except the chatzotzrot the Torah says it's biyom simchatchem ubemoadechem. Barashei Chatzechem Utkatem B'Chatzotzrot. Not every day. The shir was done every day. The Tabi Shel Shachar, Tabi Shabbat, also the Musaf. But so it's not the same. And actually, when there is Yontiv and Rosh Chodesh, you would also have the Chatzotzrot. But because the Chatzotzrot are in the Torah, they are, and first of all, Moshe, sort of Moshe made the chatzot. Well, whatever, forget that. Because the chatzot are in the Torah, they are real avoda, and guess who plays the chatzot? Any guesses? No, it's a real avoda, so it's done only by the Kohanim. Only the Kohanim can do the chatzot. But not only, by the way, can the music that's done for the Leviim be what do you call it? Be done by Leviim and not Kohanim, which shows that even when the Gemara says it's an avodah, it does not mean the full sense of avodah. But the Rambam paskins ikar shira b'peh, that the music is just an accompaniment, and therefore the actual central thing of part of the avodah is the song. And guess what? Because the music is an accompaniment, you know who else could do the music? Not just the Leviim. Even Yisraelim could do the music. So it's quite fascinating that it's important to get those ideas straight. The Chatzotzrot, which is in the Torah, only the Kohanim. This idea that the avodah is actually the idea that it's an avodah it's one of the avodot of the Leviim. That's actually where the place the Gemara learns it from. The Leviim are said, what is it? Avodat, not avodat matana. But anyway, one of the psukim of avodah by the Leviim, the Gemara says, that means what is the avodah of the Leviim? In the Torah, it was carrying the Mishkan. But post the Torah, what was it? So the Gemara says the Leviim primarily have two avodot. They watch the gates of the Mikdash and they do the song. Okay, so it's an avodah, but it's an avodah of Leviim. And which is the avodah? Right? It is either the singing or the musical instruments, and that's what's being debated here. Okay, so here you get this question, right? Is it the singing, is it the musical instruments? And that's where it would determine whether the music would override Shabbat, but that's only the music being played with the Korban, not the Simchat Beit HaShavah. One other important point, which is, what is the big deal here? Playing music on Shabbat is, right, just a rabbinic concern, right? You'll come to fix it, whatever the issue is. What do you mean, override Shabbat and so on? And Tosfos actually struggles with this, because Tosfos says other Gemaras make it seem like it's a complete non-issue, playing the music instruments on Shabbat, like whether Ikasher B'Peh, Ikasher B'Kli. The whole thing is a rabbinic thing, big deal. We normally say Ein Shvus B'Mikdash. We don't worry about rabbinic issues about Shabbat in the Mikdash when it relates to the Korbanot. So what's the big deal, And therefore, maybe you could say the opposite. Maybe you could say, no, actually, they're debating maybe even some space of Shoeva, you should be allowed to do it on Shabbat. Again, if all it is the rabbinic concerns. So it is interesting that the Gemara sort of heightens the concern around the playing of the music and says that there would even be a debate about it even at the time of the bringing of the Korban, whereas Tosfos says in other Gemara it's like a non-issue. Of course you would do it. Okay, Dov, you had a question. Dov L.
No,
yes.
no, it's okay.
Okay, so now the Gemara continues. Okay. I'm a Rav Yosef, says Rav Yosef. Mina Allah. Where do I get this from? That this is what they debate about. That they debate the music instruments that would accompany the pouring of the wine of the Korban. Tanya, we turn the Brisa. Klisha Reich Asan Shel Eitz. If you have holy vessels in the Mikdash, right? The service vessels, technically, but whatever. We just referred to this before. The sanctified vessels that you want to use in the various avodot in the Mikdash. What if they were made out of wood? Normally, obviously, they're made out of silver and gold. What if they were made out of wood? Rabbi Posel, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda Mashir. Rabbi invalidates, and Rabbi Yehuda says it's kosher. Now, you might notice it's the same Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda here who says kosher. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda before said that you could play that the music overrides Shabbat. Okay, so he's going to try to connect these two Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehudas. The music overrides Shabbat with that a kli sharet can be made out of wood. What's the connection? So let's take a look. So he says, I got a great shot. He's saying to link these two debates. Look, this is what they're debating about. This issue about can you have a holy vessel made out of wood? Man de Machshir, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, who says you can have one of the clay sharet out of wood. Savar Ikar Shira Bekli. He says, look, when the Levi'im play the musical instruments, that is the key. The central avodah of the Levi'im is the playing of the musical instruments, not the singing. Okay, so big deal. The Afinan me'abuva de Moshe. Well, let me tell you, how many musical instruments have you seen that are made out of metal? Okay, what would the musical instruments be made out of? If you've got a flute, what do you think it's made out of? Wood or reed or something like that, right? So
metal flutes.
all right, but anyway, not the ones they would use. Are they okay? Fine. I was all right. I was making a point. I didn't mean none exist, but the assumption is that they would have a flute. That the primary flutes, other Gemara say, would be wood. You can't even coat them with metal. So he says, well, if you think that that's the real avoda of the Levi'im, is the music instruments, then that's a kli shares made out of wood. Okay, and therefore that should teach you that kli shares can be made out of wood. Umad de Pasio and Rabbi, and that links with Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda before that said that you can do it on Shabbos because he thinks the music is the ikar. Umad de Pasio, the one who invalidates Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Savar Ika Shir Pepeh. No, the avoda of the Levi'im was their primary shir was the song, and therefore the music instruments were not ikar to the avodah levim. As I said before, even non-levim could do it according to this idea, and therefore they were in a kli shares. V'lo yapina me'avuva de Moshe, and we don't learn out from Moshe again. Moshe, because understanding goes way back, and we don't learn from Moshe's flute. So here he's saying is I got a great explanation, and it maps onto this other debate of Rabbi and Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, which is the debate about can you have wood kli sharet. Everybody will assume that we had wood musical instruments. Were they kli sharet or not? That depends whether ika shira b'peh or ika shira b'kli. So look at this. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, who says that it was who I understand is saying that we can say that the wooden musical instruments teach us that kli shares can be made out of wood, is the one that says you can play musical instruments in the Beit HaMikdash on Shabbat because he focuses on the music. Yes.
I'm not an expert in Chumash. Like, when was Moshe Rabbeinu playing the flute?
Yeah, I didn't explain that phrase. I didn't explain. There you go. I didn't. Maybe.
He was like herding the sheep in the mikvah. Is that a midrash?
No, well, I don't know. All Rashi says. I didn't explain.
It's a beautiful image, but we just went right over.
Right, that's true. Well, we also had. Don't forget, we had 2 prakim before Asherah de Moshe. So maybe we took from Moshe's Asherah, we took some wood. My point being that it doesn't mean that it literally was his. It means like biblical, going way back. That's at least the way Rashi explains it. Okay, Rashi's what?
In use during his time.
Right, in use during his time. The clear meaning of try to find what is in Rashi.
The type of Khalil prevalent in his time?
Rashi says, Vavuv haya b'mikdash mimos Moshe. Okay? It's the same way we talk about like Asherah de Moshe. Okay? Yeah, but it is a nice image. But that says that Moshe would play a flute?
That there was one flute from the days of Moshe that was crafted from a reed that remained in the temple, and then they wanted to plate it with gold.
All right, right. Okay, very nice. Yeah. All right, so let's continue. So that's what he says. I got a great shot, and it's all about this question of is Iker Shira b'Peh or Iker Shira b'Kli? And therefore, they're not debating Simchas Beis HaShoev on Shabbos. They're debating the general musical instruments that would come with the korbanot on Shabbos. So the Gemara says like this. No, that's not necessarily the debate. Everybody could say that the real, everybody could say that that it is, the primary avodah of Levim is the music, and therefore we do have wooden kli shares in the musical instruments. So what's the debate? Here the debate is whether you learn out something that has possible alternatives from something that did not have possible alternatives. Meaning, the reason the musical instruments were made out of wood was because they needed to be made out of wood to create the type of music that they wanted to create. Okay, so there we would allow it to be out of wood, but any other vessel could be made out of metal. That's efshar. So that's efshar. So the case of the music was efshar. You had no alternatives, so you were allowed to do it out of wood. That doesn't mean in the case where you have alternatives that we can use that as a precedent. Okay, so believe me, as as a dean, I know how students like to look at any situation as a precedent for what they want to do, even though that situation had special circumstances. It says that's the debate here. Don't even efshar misha efshar.
These are halakhic principles.
Yeah, that comes up. Yeah, very much this
Very
question.
prevalent.
Yeah, man de machshir savar, the one that says you can use wooden vessels, holds danim efshar misha efshar. You can apply a case that has no alternatives, and say, but nevertheless, we're going to make a precedent out of it. It tells you a principle. The principle is you can have wooden klishares. So even you can learn a case that has possible alternatives from one that had no alternatives. Uman de pasil savar, and the one that invalidates says, lo danim efshar misha efshar. You can't learn out cases where you have alternatives from cases you didn't have alternatives. It does not set a precedent. It does not set a rule. Okay, so that's one possibility. The e-by same, and if you want, I'll tell you. The chuliyama the ikar shir b'peh. Vid ain danim efshar misha efshar. Everybody could hold that basically the avodah Levim was the music, and you did have wooden klishares. But you know what? That's irrelevant. Everybody could also agree you cannot learn out cases of possible alternatives from ones of no possible alternatives. Everybody agrees that the fact that they used wooden musical instruments and will acknowledge that they were klishares is completely irrelevant to the question about the other klishares. Okay, so then what's the debate about can klishares be out of wood or not? The hacha here, the issue is b'meilif menorah b'chlali prati o b'ribuy umiyut. What can we learn from the menorah? The menorah is also being treated here not as just like furniture, as part of the building. It's a type of a kli shares. It's the kli that you use to do the act of hadlaka. And, again, it's a little funny because you wouldn't think it's the same as this type of movable stuff. It has a fixed place. But okay, so the question is, that was made out of metal. Can you what the Torah tells you about all the types of vessels that were made, basically were metal or coated with metal at least. So what can you learn from the menorah as a paradigm for other klisharet? You could say what you learned is that it all has to be out of gold. But what alternatives did you have by the menorah? What b'diavad could you make the menorah out of? Some people might be familiar with the story. It's even in the book of Maccabees, if memory serves, that when they entered into the Hashmonaim entered into the Mikdash, they used their spears. I think it's in the book of Maccabees. Maybe they used their spears to be, their iron spears to make an ad hoc menorah. So it doesn't have to be b'diavad out of gold. What alternatives do you have by menorah will tell me what are my range of possible klei sharet. How do you learn it out depends on your hermeneutics. There are two hermeneutics, klal and prat, or riboy umiyut. The basic way that these work, and I'll give you the example by the menorah, might as well, because that's exactly the example we're going to look at, okay, which is Yasita Minorat Zahav Tahor, so that's just gold, okay, right, Miksha Teyaseh Menorah, which sort of doesn't give you any limits, so that's considered to be a more general statement. Okay, so that's general, and this is specific. And we're going to also say that I think it's the word says Vasita. We're in the first general Vasita Menorah. Okay, it's very like not clear how we can always claim that some things are general, statements. But okay. So we say general, specific, general. By the way, so a better pasuk for this, I'm going to use this as an example because we're talking about it, but a better pasuk for this is by Charlie's favorite mitzvah, Meiser Sheni, where it says, V'natatah ha'kesef, here's a real cloud, V'natatah ha'kesef, B'chol asher ta'aveh nafshecha, anything you want, Babakar, Bayayin, Ubashechar, okay? Ubechol asher tishalcha nafshecha. So anything you want, right? Oh, but I mentioned all those things in the middle. So what does that tell me? Really anything? Can I buy a house with it? Can I buy a suit of clothes? No, I said bayayin ubashechar, babakar, batzon. I don't mean anything. I mean things like that. So that's the problem of you say a general and then a specific. What are you really saying? Okay, I give the example. Say, what do you want for dinner? You can make me anything, a steak. So what did I really say? Hey, really anything? Or okay. How about if it was a hamburger? Okay, that's good too. How much is it really just the last thing, or the fact that I started by saying anything? So. That is the question, and there are two basic different approaches to the hermeneutics you use here. Okay, Klal Uprat says that Klal Uprat means we are being specific. You're being specific. So that means that even if you open with a general statement, by the time you get to being specific, that's really what I mean. I really mean is that this is the explanation. When I say anything, I don't mean anything. When I say anything you want, what I really mean is the list that follows. Okay? So that's what you get at that statement. That's ein bechlal elamash prat. Okay, there you're limited to the prop.
What I never
Then-
understood was why do you need the
Then you don't need the klal. But what you need the klal for is when you get the next klal. When then it says ubechol asher tishalcha nafshecha. Because then when you get another klal, let's say I say, what do you want for dinner? Make me anything. A steak, really anything. Okay, but so now, I decided we're going to have salad with salmon. That's what I said. Look, we're going to have it instead. We're not going to have steak. We'll have hamburgers or something. All right, that's also good. So when you get to a general, even though you're saying anything here, what you really mean is anything like the thing in the middle. So klal, prat, klal, it becomes anything like the prat. Okay? So that is that principle
So
of
the
klal
plot
and prat.
becomes the paradigm for what you
Exactly. Now, as opposed to, that's one way of doing it, as opposed to one that answers the question Dove is asking, which is, this, okay, I sort of get it, but when you're just at this klal and prat stage, you don't understand why you needed to open with a general statement. So the other principle is called riboy umiut, okay, which means the word here is limiting. It's not prat, it's not specific, but it's limiting. Riboy is generalizing, this is limiting. So this basically at stage 1 gets to where this got to at stage 2. This says when you say anything, a steak, already there because you opened by saying anything, you mean anything like the thing I'm about to say. So this already says like the specifics. That's what mute means. It's limiting, but it's not being specific. It's not saying exactly this. It's more limiting by giving examples, but it really already means anything like the specifics. So what happens when you get another riboy? So then afterwards you said, and really it could be anything. So the combination here means that it's anything except what is completely different. Except what is completely different. So it's according to this, right, in my lovely example, if I said, anything, a steak, really anything is fine. So, okay, hamburgers is okay, chicken is okay, but if we're just having like salad and tofu, like, no, that's not, okay? That's what riboy or riboy. You can really be, already here you were talking about anything similar to the example, and at this stage, the only thing you're excluding is something that's considered could be completely different. So let's take a look now how that plays out in terms of the menorah. So it says like this. Yeah, so we have 2 minutes. Okay, so b'meilif menorah b'chlali prate o b'riboy umiut kamiflagi. Rabbi darish klali uprati. Rabbi does the klal and prat approach. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda darish riboy umiute, the riboy and the miut. Rabbi darish klali uprati. Vyasita menorat klal, which is a push. Zahav tahor prat. So general, specific. Miksha teaseh menorah chazar v'klal. So then it's making it general. Klal uprat uklal. What do you do when you get that trio? Iatadan elakain prat. By that principle, all you're at is stage 2. It has to be similar to the specific example. So what's similar to gold? Ma prat mufurash shamateches. It's a metal. Afkol shamateches, metal. That's all you get. It has to be metal because you have to be similar to the specific of gold. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda darish riboy umiyut. He does the other hermeneutics, not specific but limiting. Vasita minorat riba, that's general. Zahavta or miate, that's limiting. So already, as for him, you're already saying anything like gold. For him, you're already at the idea of metal by stage 1. So and then it says miksha teaseh menorah, beaten you should make the menorah without any specific. Chazar v'riba, now it's more general. Riba miate v'riba, so you have general, limiting, and general. So riba hakol. So the last one is pretty much including anything. So my Rabbi, what's it including? Rabbi kol mili, it's including anything. My miyat, the only thing that it's excluding is something completely different. Miyat shocheres, you can't make it out of pottery. But wood, right, that you can make it, and therefore, according to this, because of a different hermeneutics, he would say you can use kli sharet, but it has nothing to do with the question whether ikar shira b'peh or ikar shira b'kli.
It thinks that wood is more
See,
similar to metal than cheddar.